When we talk about the Mandalorian Creed, it's easy to get lost in broad concepts: honor, loyalty, duty. But the real power of this philosophy comes alive when we see it embodied in actual people. And within Star Wars, few figures illustrate the diversity, the struggle, and the resilience of Mandalorian honor better than Bo-Katan Kryze, Sabine Wren, and the enigmatic Armorer. Each of them represents a unique facet of what it means to live by the Creed and what it costs to uphold it. Let's start with Bo-Katan Kryze, because her story is nothing short of Shakespearean tragedy mixed with Star Wars grit. Bo-Katan is the sister of Duchess Satine, a leader who rejected Mandalore's warrior past in favor of peace. Satine wanted diplomacy, neutrality, and stability. Bo-Katan? She wanted fire and steel. She aligned herself with Death Watch, a splinter group devoted to restoring Mandalore's militant traditions. And here's where it gets messy. Bo-Katan's commitment to the Creed has never been simple obedience. She embodies one of the central Mandalorian dilemmas. When tradition collides with survival, which do you choose? When Darth Maul seized the Darksaber and claimed Mandalore, Bo-Katan refused to kneel. Think about that. In Mandalorian culture, the Darksaber is the ultimate symbol of leadership. To many, possession of the blade equaled legitimacy. But Bo-Katan couldn't stomach following a Sith outsider. She broke ranks, proving that for her, honor wasn't blind loyalty. It was about protecting the integrity of her people's identity. Fast forward to Star Wars Rebels and beyond. Bo-Katan reluctantly accepts the Darksaber from Sabine Wren, becoming Mandalore's leader. Critics might say she sidestepped tradition since she didn't win it in combat. And, in fact, that decision set the stage for her eventual fall. By the time of The Mandalorian, she's haunted, scarred, and desperate to reclaim what she believes is hers. Bo-Katan teaches us this. The Creed isn't just about following rules. It's about reconciling the weight of history, the burden of leadership, and the cost of every decision. She embodies the struggle of the people torn between rigid tradition and the need to adapt. And honestly, that's what makes her fascinating. She's flawed, she's stubborn, but above all, she's still standing. If Bo-Katan is the face of political and military Mandalorian honor, Sabine Wren is the soul of creative defiance within the Creed. A member of the Ghost Crew in Star Wars Rebels, Sabine gives us a completely different angle. She's not just a soldier, she's an artist. Her armor, painted in vibrant colors, customized with her identity, her emotions, her artistry. For Sabine, the Creed isn't about erasing individuality. It's about expressing it. Now, here's where her story cuts deep. Sabine grew up within the Imperial Academy, where she was manipulated into creating weapons that were later turned against her own people. That betrayal left her broken, estranged from her family, and carrying the weight of unbearable guilt. So, how does this connect to Mandalorian honor? Because Sabine embodies the fight for redemption. She doesn't just run from her mistakes, she actively seeks to make them right. She takes up the Darksaber, not because she wants to rule, but because she knows Mandalore needs a leader, and she's willing to bear that responsibility until she finds someone worthy. That someone, of course, turns out to be Bo-Katan. And here's the lesson Sabine brings to the Creed: honor isn't static. It's not just about obedience or tradition, it's about justice. It's about standing up against tyranny, even when the odds are impossible. And sometimes, it's about forgiving yourself and reclaiming your place in a community you thought you'd lost forever. Her dual identity as both artist and warrior reminds us that the Creed has room for individuality. Mandalorians aren't meant to be clones of one another. They're warriors bound by honor, but each interprets that honor through their own lens. For Sabine, her paintbrush is just as much a weapon as her blaster. And now we arrive at perhaps the most mysterious and revered figure of them all, the Armorer. Unlike Bo-Katan or Sabine, who wrestle openly with doubt, the Armorer is absolute. She doesn't question the way. She is the way. Every time she steps on screen, whether it's in The Mandalorian or the Book of Boba Fett, she feels like a living embodiment of the Creed itself. Her hammer strikes aren't just about forging Beskar, they're about forging identity. When she says, "This is the way," It carries the weight of centuries. But let's dig deeper. The Armorer represents the spiritual heart of the creed. She reminds us that Mandalorian honor isn't just about fighting, it's about survival, about protecting the foundlings, about carrying forward traditions even when everything else is lost. Think of how she counsels Din Djarin. She doesn't just hand him weapons and armor, she teaches him what it means to be Mandalorian. Her trial-by-fire leadership during the Great Purge and her willingness to stand alone against Imperial stormtroopers prove she lives the creed to its core. She doesn't bend, she doesn't compromise, and she doesn't flinch. In her, we see what unwavering dedication looks like. But here's the kicker. She also reveals the double-edged nature of the creed. That rigidity, her refusal to accept removing helmets, her harsh exile of Din when he breaks the rule, shows us the cost of absolute honor. The Armorer preserves tradition, but at what price? She forces us to ask, does honor protect a people, or does it sometimes shackle them? So, why highlight these three Mandalorians? Because together, they illustrate the full spectrum of what the creed means. Bo-Katan shows us the burden of leadership and the danger of bending tradition too far. Sabine Wren shows us the possibility of blending individuality, creativity, and justice with warrior duty. The Armorer shows us the strength and the danger of absolute adherence to tradition. Each of them is a case study in how the creed adapts or refuses to adapt in the face of history's challenges. And if we zoom out, their stories remind us why Mandalorian culture resonates so strongly with fans today. Because whether we're talking about the politics of Bo-Katan, the artistry of Sabine, or the unyielding faith of the Armorer, the creed isn't just Star Wars lore. It's a mirror held up to our own struggles with tradition, identity, and survival. At the end of the day, the Mandalorian creed is more than "this is the way." It's a living, breathing philosophy that looks different depending on who you ask. Bo-Katan, Sabine, and the Armorer prove that honor isn't one size fits all. It's contested, it's debated, it's reinterpreted in every generation. And maybe that's why we're so drawn to it. Because in our own lives, we wrestle with the same questions. Do we cling to tradition, even when it's inconvenient? Do we forge new paths, even when it means risking everything? Or do we seek a balance, somewhere in between? That's the power of the Mandalorian story. It's not just about warriors and cool helmets. It's about the fight to define honor, identity, and survival in a galaxy that never stops testing you. And in that struggle, we find reflections of ourselves. When you think of Mandalorians, you probably picture the shining Beskar armor, the T-visor helmets, and of course that famous line, "This is the way." But what happens when the way itself is tested? When the galaxy throws every possible trial against it? That's the story of the Mandalorian Creed, not just as an unchanging relic, but as something constantly under siege, constantly forced to evolve. So let's break this down. The destruction of Mandalore, the near extinction of its people, and the shocking ways the Code has been reborn. And maybe, by the end, you'll see that the Mandalorian Creed isn't as rigid as it first seems. It's actually one of the most adaptable belief systems in the galaxy. Part 1. The Fall of Mandalore. Can a creed survive without a world? First, we have to talk about the Great Cataclysm, the Purge of Mandalore. Known as the Night of 1,000 Tears, this imperial onslaught nearly erased Mandalorian culture. TIE bombers rained down fire on the domed cities, droids scoured the surface, and what was once a proud warrior civilization became ash and ruin. Now, here's the question. What happens to a code, a philosophy, when the physical foundation of its people is annihilated? Think about it. Jedi had the Jedi Temple. Sith had their strongholds. But Mandalorians? Their creed was tied to both their clans and their homeworld. Without Mandalore, the Code was suddenly floating, anchorless. And yet, it survived. That's the incredible thing. The Code didn't just vanish into history books. It went underground, carried in whispers and practices by survivors. Groups like the Children of the Watch clung to it as a lifeline, almost religiously. If anything, the Purge sharpened the Code, transforming it into something even more sacred. Part 2. The Creed Reborn through Foundlings. Here's where it gets fascinating. After the Purge, many thought Mandalorian culture was finished. But instead, we see a resurgence, one fueled by foundlings. Din Djarin is the perfect example. He wasn't born Mandalorian. He was a child, rescued during the Clone Wars, taken in by the Watch, and raised under the Creed. And he's not an isolated case. Foundlings became the backbone of Mandalorian survival. Without a thriving homeworld, Mandalorians expanded their identity outward, creating new generations from the broken pieces of the galaxy. And this is where the code shows its flexibility. Imagine if it had said, only bloodlines count. Only those born on Mandalore are Mandalorian. That would have been the end. But instead, it embraced outsiders, redefined family through loyalty and choice rather than birth. In a way, this is revolutionary, turning tragedy into an opportunity to grow stronger, more inclusive. It's almost like the old saying from Legends, Mandalorians are not born, they're made. And that ethos has carried forward, canon or not. Part 3, the Creed versus reality, clashing interpretations. But let's be real, that flexibility also sparks conflict, because not every Mandalorian interprets the Creed the same way. On one hand, you have the Children of the Watch, strict traditionalists who demand helmets stay on at all times. For them, the way is rigid, uncompromising. On the other hand, you've got people like Bo-Katan who argue that the true spirit of the Creed is about honor and unity, not rituals. This clash is fascinating because it mirrors real-world debates in religions and philosophies. Do you follow the letter of the law or the spirit? Is tradition a foundation or a chain? The Mandalorian people wrestle with this constantly, and the debates aren't just philosophical. They decide who leads, who is legitimate, and ultimately, whether their culture survives. The Darksaber itself symbolizes this conflict. Some say whoever wins it in combat is the rightful ruler. Others, like Bo-Katan at times, have been willing to accept it through different means. So, what's the truth? Maybe it's less about the weapon and more about the collective belief in what it represents. Part 4, adaptation in an ever-changing galaxy. Let's zoom out. If history tells us anything, it's that the Mandalorian Creed is built to evolve. When the Republic threatened them, they adapted. When the Jedi fought them in wars that spanned centuries, they adapted. When the Empire tried to wipe them out entirely, they adapted again. In the Mandalorian series, we see that evolution in real time. Din starts out as a strict follower, helmet never off, rulebook in hand. But over time, his bond with Grogu challenges him to rethink what family means. Is it about bloodlines, rules, or love and loyalty? His personal journey becomes a microcosm of Mandalorian culture itself, the constant negotiation between tradition and survival. And if you want to see how this plays out in broader Star Wars history, look at the comparison with the Jedi. The Jedi Code was famously rigid, no attachments, no exceptions. And what happened? The Order collapsed because it couldn't bend. The Mandalorians, by contrast, bend constantly. And that's why, even in exile, they're still here. Part 5, the Creed's future, rigid or resilient. So, where does that leave us? Is the Mandalorian Code a brittle set of ancient rules? Or is it a resilient framework that grows stronger under pressure? If you ask me, the evidence leans toward resilience. Every generation has redefined it. The warrior clans of ancient Mandalore lived one way. The pacifist new Mandalorians under Duchess Satine lived another. The Watch takes it in a different direction. And now Din, Bo-Katan, and the Armorer are shaping yet another interpretation. This is the way. Doesn't mean one single path. It means a way, a commitment to walk the road together, even if the terrain changes. And that's what keeps Mandalorian culture alive, even when the world itself is gone. At the end of the day, the Mandalorian Creed isn't really under siege. It is the siege. It's been tested by fire, crushed under empires, split by civil wars, and yet it comes back stronger every time. That's not weakness, that's adaptability. So next time you hear, "This is the way," don't think of it as a rigid slogan. Think of it as a declaration of survival, of loyalty, of finding honor in a galaxy that tries to take it from you again and again. Because if history has taught us anything, it's this: The Mandalorian way may bend, it may fracture, but it never breaks. This is the way. So here we are, standing at the edge of the galaxy, looking into the future of the Mandalorian Code. This is the way isn't just a catchphrase. It's not just something Din Djarin mutters under his breath before blasting off in his N1 starfighter. It's something that has transcended the galaxy far, far away and landed firmly in our own world. And today, we're asking the big question, what's next? What does the future of this creed look like, both in-universe, on Mandalore itself, and out here in our culture? Let's start with us, the audience. Because, let's be real, part of the reason the Mandalorian Creed feels so timeless is because it taps into universal themes that go way beyond Star Wars. Honor, loyalty, family, survival. These are concepts that resonate whether you're watching samurai films, Viking sagas, or Arthurian legends. And that's no coincidence. George Lucas himself admitted he was heavily inspired by Akira Kurosawa's samurai films, especially The Seven Samurai and Yojimbo. The Mandalorian armor, the ritualized codes, even the idea of wandering warriors who live by honor. It's practically space, Samurai 101. Add in the tribal unity and clan structure? That's straight out of human history, from Mongol Khanates to Norse jarls. But here's the kicker. This is the way has become a real-world meme. You'll see it on t-shirts, TikTok captions, even in workplace Slack channels when someone reluctantly follows procedure. Why? Because it's flexible. It can mean discipline. It can mean resignation. It can mean pride. The phrase mirrors the way the creed itself works in the galaxy. It adapts to the user while still anchoring them to a tradition. All right, let's zoom back into the Star Wars timeline. By the end of The Mandalorian Season 3, Bo-Katan cries, reclaims Mandalore. The Forge is relit. Survivors return from exile. For the first time in decades, Mandalorians actually have a shot at a unified future. But, and this is a big but, unity doesn't come easy. Mandalorians have a long history of civil war, infighting, and ideological clashes. Death Watch, the new Mandalorians, the Children of the Watch, the Protectors, the list goes on. Even when they had a planet, they couldn't stop fighting over how to be Mandalorian. So now, after near genocide, after watching their world reduced to glass, can they actually hold it together? Some fans argue that Bo-Katan's leadership marks the beginning of a more pragmatic era, one that blends the old warrior traditions with modern needs. She's not as rigid as the Armorer, nor as reckless as Pre Vizsla. She's someone who understands the price of division because she lived through it. But on the other hand, Din Djarin and the Children of the Watch still hold to the stricter path. The helmet stays on. The creed remains unbending. Can those two philosophies really coexist? Or are we heading for another round of Mandalorian Civil War, Part 7? And let's not forget outside threats. The Empire may be gone, but the galaxy is never truly safe. The First Order rises. The unknown regions loom. And if there's one constant in Star Wars, it's that peace never lasts. That means Mandalore's survival will depend on whether the code can evolve quickly enough to meet those challenges. This is the million-credit question. Because if the code stays locked in stone, if this is the way, becomes nothing more than a rigid dogma, then Mandalore risks repeating the mistakes of the past. But if the creed evolves, if it becomes less about rules and more about principles, then maybe, just maybe, the Mandalorians can avoid extinction a second time. Think about Din Djarin's journey. At first, he was all in, never removed the helmet, never questioned the way. But over time, he's bent those rules when compassion, loyalty, or survival demanded it. He removed the helmet for Grogu. He questioned the Armorer's strict interpretations. And yet, he didn't abandon the creed. He redefined it. That's adaptability in action. Bo-Katan, on the other hand, represents the other extreme. She once rejected superstition, focusing instead on leadership and legacy. But she too came full circle, accepting the mysticism of the mythosaur and realizing that tradition has power. Put those two together, and you start to see a model for a hybrid future, a Mandalorian creed that honors the past without being enslaved by it. This isn't just a Star Wars story, it's a mirror of human history. Take the samurai and Bushido. At first, Bushido was about practical survival and loyalty to one's clan. But over centuries, it evolved into a philosophy of honor and morality that influenced Japanese culture long after the samurai disappeared. Or consider the Knights Templar. Once a military order, their code and mystique outlived their actual organization, inspiring myths for centuries. The Mandalorian Code is headed down the same path. Whether or not Mandalore thrives, the idea of "this is the way" will persist because it's bigger than any one character or timeline. It's become a cultural symbol both in the galaxy far, far away and in our own. At the end of the day, why do we care so much about a bunch of helmeted mercenaries in space? Why does this creed hit us in the gut every time we hear it? Because in a chaotic world, whether it's a galaxy plagued by Sith and empires, or our own messy, unpredictable lives, we crave structure. We crave meaning, and the Mandalorian Code offers that. It says, no matter what chaos surrounds you, you can hold on to something bigger than yourself. You can belong. You can choose a way. That's why people get tattoos of the mythosaur skull. That's why cosplayers don't just wear the armor, they become it. That's why the phrase, "this is the way," resonates, even outside of Star Wars fandom. It's not just about pew-pew blasters and jetpacks. It's about identity, purpose, legacy. So, what is the future of the way? On Mandalore, it will decide whether the people rise from the ashes or collapse again into dust. In our world, it will continue to inspire, adapt, and remind us that even in the darkest times, there's a path worth walking. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real legacy of the creed. Not survival, not even victory, but the idea that honor and belonging are worth fighting for, no matter what galaxy you're in. Because, after all, this is the way.